The outbreak began with a single mysterious death in the sleepy suburban town of Middlebrook. As the victim, a middle-aged man named Henry, reanimated and attacked his own family, the horrifying truth dawned on the locals. This was no ordinary illness. The dead were rising, and the contagion was spreading like wildfire, turning neighbors into bloodthirsty monsters. Panic gripped the community as reports of the undead rampage spread. Families barricaded themselves indoors, while those caught outside fled in terror, unsure of where to find safety. The local authorities, ill-equipped to handle such an unprecedented crisis, struggled to maintain order and provide clear direction. Among the terrified residents was Sarah, a young and perceptive woman who sensed something deeply troubling about the government's response. As the military rolled in and established a perimeter around the town, sealing it off from the outside world, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that crucial information was being withheld. "It just doesn't add up," she confided to her closest friend, a tech-savvy conspiracy theorist named Lucas. "The way they're reacting, the speed with which this is spreading. There's no way they didn't see this coming." Lucas nodded gravely, his eyes darting suspiciously toward the armored vehicles and camouflaged soldiers patrolling the streets. "You know what they say, never let a good crisis go to waste," he murmured. "Maybe they've been planning for something like this all along." Sarah's brow furrowed as a chill ran down her spine. The thought of the government deliberately concealing the truth about the outbreak was as terrifying as the undead horrors that now threatened their community. She resolved to uncover the facts, no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, the situation in Middlebrook deteriorated rapidly. The quarantine zone became a makeshift prison, with supplies dwindling and tensions rising among the trapped residents. Sporadic outbreaks within the perimeter continued to claim lives, and the military's heavy-handed tactics did little to inspire trust. Undeterred, Sarah and Lucas began gathering intelligence, piecing together scraps of information and whispered rumors. They discovered that communication with the outside world had been severely restricted, with the authorities tightly controlling the flow of information. Attempts to breach the cordoned-off area were met with lethal force, further fueling the suspicion that the government was hiding something. "There's no way this is just about containing the outbreak," Sarah said, her eyes narrowed in determination. "They're covering something up, and we need to find out what." Rallying a small group of like-minded individuals, she began to formulate a plan to slip past the military blockade and venture into the outside world. They would need to be cautious, resourceful, and above all, willing to risk everything to uncover the truth. As the zombie horde continued to grow, feasting on the dwindling population within the quarantine zone, Sarah knew that time was running out. The fate of Middlebrook, and perhaps the entire nation, hung in the balance. She steeled herself for the perilous journey ahead, determined to expose the government's darkest secrets and save her community from the horrors that threatened to consume them all. The government's response to the rapidly escalating zombie outbreak in Middlebrook was swift but chaotic. Hastily erected quarantine zones struggled to contain the contagion, as panic-stricken citizens found themselves trapped behind the heavily guarded perimeters. Rumors of a cover-up swirled among the trapped residents, fueled by the military's increasingly heavy-handed tactics and the lack of clear information from the authorities. Sarah, having witnessed the government's suspicious behavior firsthand, couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was being hidden from the public. "They're lying to us, I just know it," she confided to her trusted friend Lucas, as they huddled in the dimly lit basement of a nearby house. "The way they've sealed off the town, the way they're controlling the information, it's not about containment, it's about concealment." Lucas nodded solemnly, his fingers tapping away at his laptop as he scoured the internet for any signs of a coordinated disinformation campaign. "I've been monitoring the news and social media," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "There are reports of similar outbreaks popping up in other parts of the country, but the authorities are downplaying them, acting like it's all under control." Sarah's heart raced as the gravity of the situation sank in. If the government was indeed hiding the true scale of the zombie outbreak, The implications were staggering. "We have to find a way out of this quarantine zone," she said, her voice laced with determination. "We need to get to the truth, no matter what it takes." Slowly, a plan began to take shape. Sarah and Lucas recruited a small group of fellow survivors, each with their own reasons for distrusting the government. Together, they hatched a daring scheme to breach the military blockade and venture into the unknown, driven by a thirst for the truth that outweighed their fear of the undead horrors that awaited them outside. As the group made their final preparations, the tension within the quarantine zone continued to escalate. Supplies were dwindling, tempers were fraying, and the zombie horde beyond the perimeter seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The residents, once united in their struggle for survival, now eyed each other with suspicion, unsure of whom they could trust. Sarah and her comrades knew that their mission was fraught with danger, but the stakes were too high to ignore. If the government was indeed hiding a dark secret about the origins and true nature of the zombie outbreak, the lives of everyone trapped in Middlebrook, and potentially the entire nation, hung in the balance. With a deep breath, Sarah led her small band of rebels through the shadowy streets, determined to break free of the quarantine zone and uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Defying the military's increasingly violent crackdown, Sarah recruited a small band of fellow survivors, each with their own reasons for distrusting the government. United by a thirst for the truth, they embarked on a perilous journey to uncover the shocking secrets at the heart of the zombie apocalypse. Among Sarah's comrades was Lucas, her tech-savvy friend whose keen investigative skills had already unearthed the web of suspicious activity surrounding the government's response to the outbreak. There was also Jack, a former soldier who had become disillusioned with the way the military was handling the situation, and Amelia, a young nurse whose sense of duty compelled her to seek the truth, no matter the personal risk. As the group huddled in the dimly lit basement, finalizing their escape plan, Sarah could sense the palpable tension in the air. They all knew the dangers that awaited them beyond the heavily guarded quarantine zone, but the need to uncover the government's secrets outweighed their fear. "We're running out of time," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the faces of her companions. "The longer we stay here, the more people are going to die, both from the zombies and from whatever the government is hiding. We have to move, and we have to move now." Jack, his rugged features set in a determined scowl, nodded in agreement. "I've seen how the military is operating out there," he said, his voice low and gruff. "They're not interested in protecting us. They're just trying to keep a lid on this whole mess. We can't trust them, and we can't wait for them to do the right thing." Amelia, her brow furrowed with concern, spoke up. "I'm scared, but I can't just sit back and watch innocent people suffer. If there's a chance we can uncover the truth and stop this, then we have to try." Lucas, his fingers tapping rapidly on his laptop, looked up with a grim expression. "I've compiled as much intel as I can," he said. "There are signs of similar outbreaks cropping up in other parts of the country, but the media coverage is being suppressed. The government is doing everything in its power to keep the public in the dark." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the perilous journey ahead. "Then we have no choice," she said, her voice steady and determined. "We have to get out of here and find out what they're hiding. No matter what it takes, we have to expose the truth." With a nod, the small group began to finalize their plans, knowing that they were about to embark on a mission that could cost them their lives. But the thought of the horrors unfolding around them, and the possibility that the government was complicit in the zombie outbreak, spurred them on, fueling their resolve to uncover the shocking secrets that lay beyond the quarantine zone. Their investigation led them to a heavily guarded research facility, where they discovered classified documents detailing the government's foreknowledge of the zombie plague. The evidence was damning. Authorities had not only anticipated the outbreak, but had been conducting dangerous experiments that ultimately led to its spread. As the group carefully made their way through the perimeter, dodging patrols and evading the undead, they could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The stakes had never been higher, and the realization that the very institutions they had trusted were responsible for this calamity filled them with a burning sense of outrage. "I can't believe it," Amelia whispered, her face pale with shock, as she pored over the classified files they had managed to retrieve. They knew this was going to happen, and they did nothing to stop it. Worse, they were actively working on developing some kind of zombie weapon. Jack, his jaw clenched in a mix of fury and grim determination, let out a low guttural growl. "I knew those bastards couldn't be trusted," he spat. "All this time, they've been more concerned with their own twisted agenda than protecting the people. Well, now we've got the proof, and we're gonna make them pay." Sarah, her eyes narrowed with focus, quickly scanned the documents, her mind racing to piece together the horrifying implications. "If this is true, then the government has been lying to us from the start," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "They've been putting everyone's lives at risk, all for the sake of some sick experiment. We have to get this information out there, no matter what it takes." Lucas, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his laptop, let out a low whistle. "I'm already working on it," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm uploading the files to an encrypted server as we speak, and I've got some contacts who can help us get the word out." The group knew that their actions were placing them in grave danger. The government would stop at nothing to keep these secrets buried, and the undead horrors that lurked beyond the research facility's walls posed a constant threat. But the magnitude of the betrayal they had uncovered only served to strengthen their resolve. "This isn't just about Middlebrook anymore," Sarah said, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "This is about the entire country, about the lives of millions of innocent people. We have to expose the truth, no matter the cost." With a nod, the group steeled themselves for the perilous journey back through the quarantine zone, their minds focused on the monumental task that lay ahead. The government's darkest secrets were about to be laid bare, and the consequences would be felt far beyond the confines of their small town. Horrified by the damning revelations they had uncovered at the research facility, the group risked everything to leak the incriminating files to the public. As the truth spread like wildfire, the government's credibility crumbled, and citizens took to the streets, demanding answers and accountability. Sarah and her comrades knew that the stakes had never been higher. The information they had obtained could potentially upend the entire response to the zombie outbreak, exposing the government's complicity and shattering the public's trust in its leaders. But the thought of countless lives being endangered by the authorities' callous disregard for the truth spurred them on, fueling their determination to see this crusade through. "We have to get this out there as quickly as possible," Sarah said, her voice tinged with urgency as they huddled in a dimly lit basement, surrounded by the ever-present threat of the undead. "The government is going to do everything in its power to bury this and maintain control. We have to beat them to the punch." Lucas, his fingers flying across the keyboard, nodded grimly. "I've set up an anonymous file-sharing network and contacted a few trusted journalists and whistleblowers," he said, his brow furrowed with concentration. "Once I upload the documents, it'll be out of our hands. The truth will spread like wildfire." Jack, his arms crossed over his chest, let out a low, guttural sound. "Good," he said, his eyes narrowed with a fierce intensity. "Those bastards need to be held accountable for what they've done. This isn't just about Middlebrook anymore. This is about the entire country, maybe even the world. We can't let them get away with it." Amelia, her expression a mix of trepidation and determination, spoke up. "I know this is dangerous, but I also know that we have to do it," she said, her voice steadied despite the fear that lurked behind her eyes. "Too many lives are at stake. We have to expose the truth, no matter the cost." With a resolute nod, Sarah reached out and squeezed Amelia's hand, offering a silent show of support. She knew that the road ahead would be perilous, but the thought of the government's deception and the lives it had endangered steeled her resolve. "Let's do this," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "For Middlebrook, for the country, and for everyone who deserves to know the truth." The group quickly set their plan in motion, uploading the classified documents to the anonymous network and disseminating the information through a carefully curated network of contacts. As the explosive revelations began to spread, the public's trust in the government rapidly eroded, and citizens took to the streets, demanding answers and accountability. Sarah and her comrades had become reluctant heroes in the fight against the official lies, their actions igniting a spark that threatened to engulf the very foundations of the establishment. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the truth would come to light, no matter the cost. The government's response to the explosive revelations was swift and ruthless. Authorities launched a massive crackdown, arresting and silencing those who dared to speak out against the official narrative. Sarah and her comrades found themselves on the run, pursued by relentless government agents and facing an increasingly hostile and paranoid public. As the news of the government's cover-up spread, panic and outrage gripped the nation. Protests erupted in major cities, with citizens demanding transparency and accountability. The authorities, desperate to regain control, resorted to heavy-handed tactics, deploying military force to quell the dissent. Sarah and her small group, now forced to operate in the shadows, knew that they were in grave danger. The government had mobilized its full resources to hunt them down, determined to silence the whistleblowers and bury the incriminating evidence they had uncovered. "They're not going to stop until they find us," Lucas said, his eyes darting nervously as they huddled in a cramped, abandoned apartment. "We've got to keep moving, stay off the grid as much as possible." Jack, his jaw set in a grim expression, nodded in agreement. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," he said, his voice low and gruff. "But we can't give up now, not when the truth is finally starting to come out." Amelia, her face pale with worry, spoke up. "I'm scared, you guys," she admitted, her voice trembling. "What if they catch us? What if we can't get the information out there in time?" Sarah reached out and squeezed Amelia's hand, offering a reassuring squeeze. "We're not going to let that happen," she said, her eyes burning with determination. "We've come too far to back down now. We have to keep going, no matter what." Evading the government's relentless pursuit, the group moved from one safe house to the next, constantly on the lookout for signs of pursuit. They knew that the authorities were not just after them, but also anyone who dared to spread the truth about the government's involvement in the zombie outbreak. As the public's trust in the government continued to crumble, the backlash against the crackdown only intensified. Citizens, outraged by the blatant suppression of information, took to social media and alternative news outlets to share the group's findings, fueling a growing resistance movement. Sarah and her comrades, now hailed as reluctant heroes by a growing number of supporters, found themselves in the crosshairs of a desperate government. The stakes had never been higher, and the threat of capture or even death loomed ever present. But they refused to be silenced, driven by the knowledge that the truth they held could change the course of the zombie apocalypse and the very future of the nation. Undeterred by the government's relentless pursuit, Sarah and her team continued their crusade, using their limited resources to evade capture and find new ways to share the truth. They reached out to sympathetic journalists, activists, and whistleblowers, building a network of allies determined to expose the government's deception and hold those responsible accountable. As the group moved from one safe house to the next, constantly on the lookout for signs of pursuit, they knew that time was of the essence. The zombie outbreak was spiraling out of control, and the public's trust in the government was crumbling with each passing day. They had to act quickly to get the information out there, before the authorities could silence them for good. "We need to get this to as many people as possible," Sarah said, her eyes burning with determination as she pored over the classified documents they had managed to retrieve. "The more people who know the truth, the harder it will be for the government to cover it up." Lucas, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his laptop, nodded in agreement. "I've been in touch with some underground journalists and activist groups," he said, his brow furrowed with concentration. "They're willing to help us get the word out, but we need to be careful. The government is watching everyone." Jack, his arms crossed over his chest, let out a low guttural sound. "We need to be smart about this," he said, his voice gruff and unwavering. "We can't just dump the files and hope for the best. We need a coordinated strategy, one that keeps us one step ahead of the bastards hunting us down." Amelia, her expression a mix of determination and trepidation, spoke up. "I know this is dangerous, but I also know that we have to do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that lurked behind her eyes. "Too many lives are at stake. We have to expose the truth, no matter the cost." With a resolute nod, the group set to work, leveraging their connections and resources to disseminate the incriminating evidence through a carefully curated network of channels. They used encrypted communication methods, anonymous file-sharing platforms, and even physical drops to ensure that the information reached as many sympathetic ears as possible. As the truth began to spread, the public's outrage only grew, with citizens taking to the streets in ever-increasing numbers to demand accountability. The government's attempts to suppress the information only fueled the growing resistance movement, as more and more people rallied behind Sarah and her team's crusade. Faced with the mounting pressure, the authorities resorted to increasingly desperate measures, cracking down on dissent and arresting anyone they suspected of being involved in the leak. But the group remained elusive, constantly evading capture and finding new ways to share the truth, their determination unwavering in the face of the government's relentless pursuit. As the zombie outbreak escalated and the government's cover-up unraveled, the nation found itself in a state of turmoil. The public's trust in its leaders was shattered, and the ultimate fate of the country hung in the balance. Sarah and her team, having risked everything, stood as beacons of hope in a world consumed by fear and uncertainty, determined to uncover the full truth no matter the cost. The revelations they had uncovered had sent shockwaves through the country, sparking widespread protests and civil unrest. Millions of citizens, outraged by the government's deception, demanded answers and accountability, refusing to be silenced in the face of the mounting crisis. Sarah and her comrades, now hailed as reluctant heroes by the burgeoning resistance movement, continued to elude the authorities' relentless pursuit. They leveraged their network of allies, both within and outside the government, to disseminate the damning evidence and coordinate a coordinated effort to expose the truth. As the zombie horde continued to spread, fueled by the government's negligence and callous disregard for human life, the stakes only grew higher. The nation teetered on the brink of collapse, with the authorities struggling to maintain control and the public's faith in the system crumbling with each passing day. But in the midst of the chaos, Sarah and her team refused to be silenced. They knew that the truth they held was the key to turning the tide, to rallying the people and galvanizing a resistance capable of confronting the government's deception and the looming threat of the undead. Through daring leaks, clandestine meetings, and strategic media campaigns, they continued to chip away at the government's facade, chipping away at the lies and obfuscation until the full scale of the betrayal was laid bare for all to see. The public, once paralyzed by fear, now burned with a righteous fury, determined to hold their leaders accountable and reclaim control of their own destinies. As the crisis reached a fever pitch, Sarah and her team found themselves at the forefront of a movement that threatened to reshape the very foundations of the nation. They stood as symbols of resistance, their unwavering commitment to the truth inspiring others to join the fight, to stand up against the government's tyranny and fight for a future free from the shackles of deception. In the end, the fate of the country, and perhaps the world, rested upon the shoulders of this small but indomitable group. Their quest for justice had become a rallying cry, a beacon of hope in a world consumed by fear and uncertainty. And as they pressed onward, driven by an unshakable belief in the power of the truth, they knew that they were on the cusp of uncovering the final devastating secrets that would redefine the course of the crisis and the very future of the nation.